The shadow fell over Chicago at exactly 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, and within minutes the same shadow covered half of North America. People stopped in the streets and looked up at something their minds could barely process. A ship hung in the sky, so massive that it blocked the sun and turned day into a strange purple twilight. It was not shaped like anything humans had imagined in their movies or books. It looked like a black mountain that someone had turned upside down, with lights running along its edges in patterns that hurt the eyes if you stared too long. Danny Wells was in the middle of rehearsing his comedy set at a small club in Denver when the lights flickered, and every screen in the building switched to the same image. A face appeared, though calling it a face felt generous. It had too many eyes arranged in a circle around a mouth that opened sideways, and its skin looked like wet stone. The creature spoke, and somehow everyone understood the words even though the sounds it made were nothing like human language. "People of Earth," the creature said, "I am Supreme Commander of the Dominion. Your planet has been selected for integration into our empire. You will surrender all military assets, all government authority, and all resources to Dominion control within 48 hours. Resistance will result in the complete destruction of your species. This is not a negotiation. This is your only warning." The transmission ended. For about 30 seconds, the world held its breath. Danny stood on the empty stage of the comedy club, staring at the dark screen, and then he did something that surprised even himself. He laughed. Not a nervous laugh or a scared laugh, but a genuine belly laugh that echoed through the empty room. 3,000 miles away in Washington, the president was being rushed to a secure bunker, while advisors shouted over each other about response protocols and nuclear options. In Moscow, Beijing, London, and 100 other capitals, the same chaos unfolded. Military officers demanded action. Scientists demanded more information. Everyone demanded answers that nobody had. But something strange was happening on the internet. Within 15 minutes of the transmission ending, the first memes appeared. Someone had already googly eyes onto Supreme Commander's face. Someone else had added a caption that read, "When mom says dinner is ready but you have to set the table first." A teenager in Brazil created a video comparing the alien ship to a giant space that had gotten lost looking for dust to clean, and within an hour it had 50 million views. Danny Wells went live on his social media that evening, sitting in his apartment with a beer in his hand and the purple twilight visible through his window. He looked into the camera and shrugged. "So apparently we're getting conquered by aliens who look like someone microwaved a rock collection," he said, "and they gave us 48 hours to surrender. 48 hours. My cable company gives me more time than that to pay my bill. These aliens crossed the galaxy to threaten us and they could not even round up to a full week. That is just lazy imperialism." The video went viral within hours. News networks picked it up. People shared it not because it was particularly clever, but because it said what millions were already thinking. The aliens were terrifying, yes. The ship was impossibly huge, yes. But something about the whole situation felt so absurd that fear alone could not be the only response. In homes across the world, families sat together and watched the coverage. Parents held their children and wondered if this was the end of everything. But they also watched the memes spreading and the jokes multiplying, and something in the human spirit refused to simply cower. A grandmother in Texas posted a video of herself shaking her fist at the sky and telling the aliens that she had survived 3 husbands and 2 hurricanes, and she was not about to be intimidated by some fancy lights and a bad attitude. The video got 80 million views by midnight. They were watching. They had been conquering species across the galaxy for 10,000 years, and they had a system that worked perfectly. Arrive with overwhelming force, deliver the ultimatum, wait for the panic and the begging and the desperate attempts at negotiation. Every species reacted the same way. Fear was universal. Terror was the great equalizer that made conquest simple and clean. But the humans were not reacting correctly. Supreme Commander reviewed the intercepted communications with growing confusion. Where were the surrender offers? Where were the pleas for mercy? Instead, his analysts showed him something called a meme that depicted his face on the body of a dancing human, accompanied by music that made his translator software crash 3 times before giving up entirely. "They are mocking us," one of his advisors said, his multiple eyes blinking in sequence. "This species is facing extinction and they are making jokes." Did not understand. In his entire career spanning 200 years and 47 conquered worlds, he had never seen anything like this. They did not have humor. They had efficiency and power and absolute certainty in their superiority. The concept of laughing in the face of death was so foreign to their psychology that they literally did not have a word for it. Back on Earth, the United Nations held an emergency session that lasted through the night. Representatives argued about whether to attempt communication, whether to launch nuclear weapons at the ship, whether to simply surrender and hope for mercy. But by morning, a different kind of consensus was forming, not among the politicians, but among the people. Social media polls showed that 70% of humans opposed surrender, not because they thought they could win a military fight, but because something deeper was at work. Comments flooded every platform with variations of the same sentiment. "If we are going to die, we might as well die laughing. These aliens want us to beg. They can wait forever. My ancestors survived worse than this with less technology and more stubbornness." Danny Wells ended his second viral video with words that would later be carved into monuments. "They want our surrender. They want us to kneel. Sorry, but we have been scaring ourselves with monster movies for 100 years. We have imagined every possible apocalypse in loving detail. We have written books about our own extinction and then given them awards. You cannot frighten a species that treats fear as entertainment. You just become another show." The first day of the ultimatum ended with humanity doing something the galaxy had never witnessed. A species facing certain destruction had responded not with terror but with ridicule. And somewhere in the massive ship hanging above North America, Supreme Commander felt something he had never experienced in his 2 centuries of conquest. He felt uncertain. The morning of the second day brought a decision that would have seemed insane under any normal circumstances. But these were not normal circumstances, and the humans making the decision had already accepted that traditional approaches were pointless. The alien ship could vaporize every city on Earth in minutes. Missiles would not work. Negotiations from a position of weakness would not work. So the newly formed United Response Council decided to try something that had never been attempted in the history of interstellar relations. They decided to send comedians. Lisa Monroe was a communications specialist who had spent 15 years working for various government agencies, translating diplomatic messages and managing international broadcasts. She had expected to spend this crisis in a bunker somewhere, helping craft careful statements designed to buy time. Instead, she found herself in a conference room in Geneva, staring at a list of names that included late-night hosts, internet personalities, and a man whose entire career was built on making fun of things. "This is insane," she said to the general sitting across from her. "You want me to coordinate a comedy show as humanity's official response to an alien invasion?" The general, a tired-looking woman named Price, rubbed her eyes and sighed. The traditional response would be to send diplomats who would grovel and negotiate and eventually surrender. That is what every other species has done, and every other species has been conquered. Maybe insane is exactly what we need. The plan came together in 12 hours, which was some kind of record for international cooperation. Representatives from 40 countries agreed on a single approach. Hit the aliens with everything humanity had in terms of absurdity and see what happened. The worst-case scenario was extinction, which was already on the table anyway. The best-case scenario was buying time to figure out something better. Danny Wells got the call at 6 in the morning, and by noon, he was on a military transport heading to a broadcast facility in Colorado. He met the rest of the team there. a sketch comedy group from Canada, a satirist from Britain named Oliver who had made a career out of mocking politicians, a Japanese game show host named who specialized in putting people in ridiculous situations, and a grandmother from the internet named Foster who had become famous for her brutally honest product reviews. "So we are humanity's last hope," Oliver said, looking around the room with the expression of someone who had just been told a very elaborate joke. "A bunch of professional idiots. Wonderful." Lisa coordinated from a control room filled with screens and equipment that would beam their broadcast directly to the ship. The aliens had opened a communication channel, presumably expecting surrender negotiations. They were about to get something very different. The broadcast began with a formal greeting. Lisa had insisted on that much, because even absurdity needed structure. A diplomat appeared on screen, welcomed the to Earth, and expressed humanity's desire for peaceful relations. Then the feed cut to a montage that had been assembled by thousands of volunteers working through the night. Cats wearing tiny hats, dogs failing to catch treats, humans walking into glass doors, a supercut of every major world leader tripping or stumbling over the past decade, a choir singing a hastily written song about the alien ship that compared it to various unflattering things, a cooking show where the host deliberately made everything wrong while smiling at the camera, children's drawings of the aliens, most of which depicted them as friendly blobs with too many eyes. Supreme Commander watched the transmission with all 14 of his eyes, and for the first time in his long life, he had no idea what he was looking at. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. "We requested communication with your leaders." The screen shifted to show a panel of humans sitting at a long table, each one wearing a badge that said Earth's Leader in large letters. Danny Wells sat in the middle, flanked by Foster, and a 9-year-old boy named Cody Grant who had won the National Spelling Bee 3 years in a row. "You wanted to talk to our leader," Danny said with a completely straight face. "The problem is, we have about 8 billion people and we all think we are in charge, so we figured we would just rotate. Today it is my turn, but tomorrow it might be Cody here. He is very responsible for his age." Cody leaned toward the camera and adjusted his glasses. "Excuse me, Mr. Alien Commander, but I noticed you mispronounced ultimatum in your first message. The emphasis should be on the third syllable. Would you like me to spell it for you?" Translator struggled to convey the tone of what was happening. The words made sense individually, but together they formed something his mind could not process. This child was correcting him. This species facing annihilation was correcting his pronunciation. "You are facing extinction," said slowly, as if explaining something to someone very stupid. "Your world will be destroyed. Everyone you know will die. How can you joke at such a moment?" Foster leaned forward, her gray hair perfectly styled and her expression one of patient disappointment. "Sweetheart, I raised 4 children, buried 2 husbands, and survived a government audit. You are going to have to try harder than floating in the sky and making threats. My second husband made threats every day, and I just tuned him out too." The broadcast continued for 3 hours. Every time tried to steer the conversation toward surrender terms, the humans changed the subject. Oliver delivered a detailed analysis of the ship's design, comparing it unfavorably to various household appliances. Challenged the Supreme Commander to a game show competition with questions about Earth culture that made no sense to anyone, including the humans watching. A musician appeared and performed a song that consisted entirely of the word "no," sung in different styles for 4 minutes. In the control room, Lisa watched the communications channels light up with confused chatter. The aliens were talking among themselves, trying to understand what was happening. Their psychology was built on certainty and dominance. They had no framework for processing a species that refused to engage with threats on a serious level. "Is it working?" General Price asked from over Lisa's shoulder. Lisa shook her head slowly, not in negation but in wonder. "I have no idea, But they have not destroyed us yet, and we are already past the point where most species surrender. So maybe, honestly, I think we broke them a little. On the alien ship, ended the communication and sat in silence for a long time. His advisors waited for orders that did not come. Finally, one of them spoke. "Commander, what are your instructions?" Looked at the frozen image on his screen, showing Danny Wells waving at the camera with a smile that contained no fear whatsoever. "I do not know," admitted. "I have conquered 47 worlds. I have never not known." The second day ended with humanity still alive and the aliens more confused than they had ever been. It was not victory, but it was not defeat either, and for a species that had expected to be dust by now, that felt like something worth celebrating. The island was called Henderson, a tiny speck of land in the South Pacific that nobody lived on and few people had ever heard of. At exactly 9 in the morning on the third day, a beam of light descended from the ship and touched the island for precisely 2 seconds. When the light faded, Henderson Island no longer existed. Not destroyed in the sense of being broken apart, but simply gone, as if someone had erased it from reality and left only steam rising from the boiling ocean where it had been. Supreme Commander broadcast his message immediately afterward. "This is a demonstration of our power. The next target will not be uninhabited. Surrender now, or we will begin removing your cities one by one." The threat was real. The power was undeniable. Satellites captured footage of the island's destruction that spread across every screen on Earth within minutes. This was not a joke or a meme or something that could be laughed away. The aliens could end human civilization with the same effort a human might use to turn off a light switch. For about 3 hours, the laughter stopped. People watched the footage and felt the weight of genuine terror settle into their bones. Parents held their children. Prayers were whispered in 1,000 languages. The joke had stopped being funny. And then something shifted. It started on a beach in California, where a crowd had gathered to watch the sky. Someone produced a speaker and started playing music, and then someone else raised their middle finger toward the dark shape hanging overhead. Within minutes, the entire beach was doing it, a silent gesture of defiance aimed at beings who had just demonstrated they could wipe out humanity without breaking a sweat. The video spread faster than the destruction footage. Within hours, similar scenes were playing out on beaches and rooftops and public squares around the world. A petition appeared online demanding that the aliens try again, but this time make it interesting. It gathered 400 million signatures in 6 hours. A musician released a song called "Vaporize This" that hit #1 in 80 countries before the day was over. In a Pentagon basement, Shaw was not participating in the defiance. He was working, because working was the only thing that kept the fear from overwhelming him. Was an analyst who specialized in communication patterns, and for the past 2 days he had been studying every piece of transmission his team could intercept. He was looking for weaknesses, for anything that might give humanity an edge. What he found was not a weakness in the traditional sense. It was something stranger. "Their entire military doctrine is psychological," he explained to a room full of generals and advisors who looked like they had not slept in days. "Look at the pattern. They show up with overwhelming force, deliver a terrifying ultimatum, and wait for the target species to collapse from fear. Every species they have conquered followed the same pattern: panic, then desperate negotiation, then surrender. They do not actually fight wars. They have not had to fight a real battle in 3,000 years." General Price frowned at the data on the screen. "So their weapons work, but their strategy depends on terror." "Exactly," said, "and terror only works if the target is afraid. They have never encountered a species that responds to existential threats by making jokes. Their psychology does not have a framework for it. Look at their internal communications." He pulled up a transcript. "They are genuinely confused. Some of their officers are asking if humans might be too stupid to understand the danger. Others are wondering if we have some kind of secret weapon that makes us confident. They do not know how to categorize us." Lisa Monroe was in the room, and she leaned forward with sudden understanding. So our response is actually working, not because it is a military strategy, but because it is breaking their assumptions about how conquered species behave. Nodded, they expected us to be like the others, terrified, desperate, willing to do anything to survive. Instead, we are throwing a global party and making fun of their ship design. For a species built on psychological warfare, that is devastating. They do not know what move to make next. On the ship, this exact conversation was happening in reverse. Supreme Commander had convened his senior officers to discuss the inexplicable human response to their demonstration of power. "They should be begging for mercy," Admiral Thresh said, her voice carrying the frustration of someone whose entire worldview was being challenged. "We just destroyed a piece of their planet. Every other species at this point has been sending surrender offers every few minutes. Instead, they are dancing," another officer said, displaying footage from the California beach, and making a gesture that our translators say is either a mating display or an insult. They cannot agree on which. Stared at the footage in silence. He had destroyed an island. He had demonstrated power beyond anything these humans could match, and their response was to make rude gestures and dance. "Perhaps they do not understand death," one of his scientists suggested. "Some species have religious beliefs that make them unafraid of physical destruction." "No," said slowly. "I have studied their transmissions. They understand death perfectly well. They fear it. Their entertainment is filled with stories about death and loss. They know exactly what we can do to them." He paused, struggling to articulate something his mind could barely grasp. "They are afraid. I am certain of it, but they are choosing to laugh anyway. It is not ignorance or delusion. It is deliberate." On Earth, the sun was setting on the third day. The original 48-hour deadline had passed. Nobody had surrendered. Nobody had even seriously discussed surrendering. Instead, humanity was engaged in the strangest act of collective defiance in its history. Amateur radio operators around the world had organized something they called Operation Bad Joke. Using frequencies they knew they were monitoring, they began flooding alien communication channels with the worst humor humanity had to offer. Dad jokes, puns, knock-knock jokes, riddles with no logical answers. The complete lyrics to novelty songs from the past 100 years. A man in Germany spent 4 hours broadcasting nothing but chicken crossing the road variations in every language he knew. The translators, which were sophisticated AI systems designed to decode complex alien languages, began experiencing what could only be described as existential breakdowns. One translation system, confronted with a joke about why the bicycle could not stand up on its own, spent 3 hours trying to find the deeper strategic meaning, before concluding that humans were either geniuses operating on a level beyond comprehension or completely insane. It could not determine which. Lisa Monroe received a report about the translation failures and actually laughed out loud for the first time since the crisis began. "We're breaking their computers with puns," she said to General Price. "That might be the most human thing we have ever accomplished." The third day ended with humanity still standing, still laughing, and still refusing to behave the way conquered species were supposed to behave. They had demonstrated they could destroy anything they wanted. But destruction without psychological victory was just violence, and violence without purpose was something their doctrine had no answer for. In the depths of the alien ship, Supreme Commander made a decision. If fear would not work, he would try something else. He would show the humans what they had done to other worlds. He would make them understand the scale of suffering that awaited them. It was a reasonable plan. It made perfect sense from a perspective. And like everything else he had tried so far, it would fail in ways he could not possibly anticipate. The images began appearing on every screen at midnight. Supreme Commander had decided to show humanity what awaited them if they continued their defiance. He broadcast footage from dozens of conquered worlds, each one a testament to power and ruthlessness. Cities reduced to ash. Species that had once built great civilizations now living as servants in labor camps. Monuments destroyed, cultures erased, entire histories wiped from existence because they found them inconvenient. The footage was horrifying in its scope and its casual cruelty. These were not quick deaths but slow suffocations of everything that made a species unique. "This is your future's voice announced over the images. "This is what happens to those who resist. Every world you see was once defiant. Every species you see once believed they could stand against us. Look at them now. Look at what your jokes will cost you." He expected despair. He expected the humor to finally die, replaced by the reasonable terror that should have been there from the beginning. Instead, he was 67 years old, a retired history teacher from a small town in Ohio who had spent 40 years trying to make teenagers care about the past. She had a voice like gravel and honey mixed together, and she had no patience for drama or exaggeration. When the United Response Council needed someone to answer this horror show, they chose her because she was exactly what humanity needed at that moment. Someone who could look at the worst and respond with tired, unimpressed honesty. The broadcast began without music or special effects. Sat in a simple chair, wearing a cardigan and glasses that kept sliding down her nose, and she looked into the camera like she was about to explain why the homework was late again. "So the aliens want to scare us with pictures of bad things happening," she began. "That is very sweet of them, but I think they do not understand who they are dealing with. So let me show them something." What followed was a documentary of human history that narrated with the same tone she might use to describe a particularly disappointing school assembly. "This is the Black Death," she said as medieval images appeared. "It killed about a third of Europe. People thought it was the end of the world. They were wrong, but it was still very unpleasant. And then things got really stupid because humans decided to blame each other and have some wars about it." The images shifted. "This is World War I. We invented new ways to kill each other and then used them so much that an entire generation was traumatized. 20 million dead, give or take. We called it the war to end all wars, which shows you how good we are at predictions." More images. "This is World War II, 60 million dead. We invented nuclear weapons and immediately used them on ourselves, twice, on cities full of regular people, because we were in a hurry to end the war or because we wanted to show off, or honestly the reasons are still being argued about. The point is, we did that, to ourselves." Paused to push her glasses up her nose. "I could keep going. The genocides, the famines, the plagues, the environmental disasters we caused through sheer stubbornness. We have been finding creative ways to suffer and die since we climbed down from the trees. And every single time, someone said it was the end. And every single time, we kept going." She leaned forward, and her voice lost its tired humor for just a moment. "You want to show us horror? We invented horror. We wrote books about it and gave them awards. We made movies about our own extinction and ate popcorn while we watched. You are not showing us anything we have not already imagined in loving detail and then discussed over dinner." The broadcast cut to modern footage. People rebuilding after disasters, communities coming together after tragedies, humans doing the stubborn work of survival despite everything telling them to give up. "We are not brave," continued. "We are just too stupid to quit. You can destroy us, sure. Your weapons are very impressive, but you cannot scare us into surrender because we have been scaring ourselves for thousands of years and we are still here. At this point, fear is just background noise." The documentary ended with looking directly into the camera, and for a moment her expression shifted from tired teacher to something older and harder. "You have conquered a lot of worlds," she said. "Good for you. But I think you picked the wrong planet this time. We are not just stubborn. We are aggressively, unreasonably, almost pathologically unwilling to give up. It is not our best quality, honestly. It has caused us a lot of problems, but right now it is the only quality that matters." On the ship, The reaction to this broadcast was unlike anything that had come before. The horror footage had been intended to crush human spirits, to show them the inevitable end that awaited resistance. Instead, the humans had responded by cataloging their own horrors with something that almost sounded like pride. They did not understand. They could not understand. Their species had evolved in a stable environment where cooperation and efficiency led to survival. They had never faced the kind of constant catastrophe that had shaped human psychology. The idea that a species could experience so much suffering and respond by becoming more stubborn rather than more compliant was simply not in their biological or cultural framework. Meanwhile, Operation Bad Joke had evolved. The amateur radio operators had been joined by professional broadcasters, university students, and anyone with access to a transmitter. The communication channels were now receiving a constant stream of humanity's most bizarre cultural output. Someone was broadcasting the complete works of a comedian who specialized in absurdist humor that made no sense in any language. A radio station in Brazil was playing nothing but songs about heartbreak, which the translators kept interpreting as coded military communications. A group in Japan had organized a 24-hour stream of game show sound effects with no context whatsoever. The translator AIs were failing at an increasing rate. One system, confronted with a song about a grandmother being run over by a fictional creature called a reindeer, spent 6 hours trying to determine whether this was a threat, a religious ritual, or a declaration of war before shutting down completely. Another translator received a knock-knock joke and concluded that humans communicated through a complex system of door-based metaphors that would require years of study to decode. In the command center of the ship, Supreme Commander sat alone in the darkness. His officers had stopped bringing him reports because the reports no longer made sense. The humans were not surrendering. They were not negotiating. They were not even fighting in any recognizable way. They were just existing at them, loudly and persistently, and with an endless stream of content that all rational analysis. For the first time in 200 years, considered the possibility that he might not win. Not because the humans were stronger, but because they were something he had never encountered. A species that treated its own destruction as just another problem to be laughed at. His communications officer approached nervously. "Commander, we are receiving reports from the outer territories. Word of the human response has spread through our conquered worlds. There are signs of unrest." Closed his eyes. Of course there were. The empire was built on the certainty of their psychological dominance. Every conquered species had been broken through fear, and now they were all watching a species that refused to break, that responded to threats with jokes and horror with history lessons. If one species could resist, others might try. The empire that had seemed unshakable 3 days ago was suddenly looking very fragile. Back in Ohio, had no idea that her tired monologue about human stubbornness was causing political upheaval across a galactic empire. She was already asleep, because she had spent 40 years dealing with difficult teenagers, and she knew when she needed rest. The 4th day ended with the facing something worse than military defeat. They were facing the collapse of their entire approach to conquest, and they still had no idea how to respond to a species that simply would not stop laughing. The morning of the 5th day brought silence from the ship. No broadcasts, no demands, no demonstrations of power. The massive vessel still hung in the sky over North America, but it had gone quiet in a way that felt different from before. People around the world watched and waited, uncertain whether this was a good sign or the calm before something terrible. Lisa Monroe had barely slept in 4 days, but she was still at her station when the private communication request came through. The wanted to talk, but not through the public channels. Supreme Commander was requesting a direct conversation with one representative. No broadcasts, no audience, no jokes, just two beings talking. Lisa accepted because at this point she had nothing left to lose. The holographic display flickered to life, and she found herself facing the alien commander for the first time without screens or intermediaries between them. Up close, he looked tired. She had not known that could look tired, but something in the arrangement of his many eyes suggested exhaustion. "I have been conquering worlds for 200 years, said without preamble. I have seen species beg, fight, bargain, and despair. I have seen courage and cowardice and everything between, but I have never seen anything like your species." Lisa waited. She had learned over the past 4 days that sometimes the best response was no response at all. "The deadline passed days ago," continued. "By every protocol of the Dominion, I should have begun systematic destruction of your major population centers, but I have not. Do you know why?" "Because it would not work," Lisa said. "You could kill us all, but you could not make us surrender first. And surrender is what you actually need, is it not? Dead species cannot serve the Empire. Dead species cannot contribute resources or labor. You need us compliant, and we will not comply." Sideways' mouth twisted into something that might have been a bitter smile. "You understand more than I expected. Yes. Destruction without integration is pointless waste. The Dominion does not waste resources, but there is another reason." He touched a control and images appeared between them. Reports from across the Empire showing unrest on a dozen conquered worlds. Species that had been docile for centuries were suddenly asking questions. If the humans could resist, why could they not? If fear was not absolute, what else might be possible? "Your defiance is spreading," said. "Every day we remain here without breaking you, our hold on other worlds weakens. You have not defeated us with weapons. You have defeated us with something we have no defense against." Lisa leaned forward. "What is that?" "Hope." The word came out like it pained him. "You have shown the galaxy that it is possible to laugh at the. You have shown that fear is a choice, not an inevitability. Do you have any idea what that means for an empire built entirely on psychological control?" The weight of what he was saying settled over Lisa like a blanket. They had not just survived. They had accidentally started something that could change the entire balance of power in the galaxy. "What happens now?" she asked. Was silent for a long moment. "I must ask you something first, a question that has been consuming me since this began. I must understand, or I will never be able to explain this to my superiors." Lisa nodded for him to continue. "Why do you not fear death? Not your species in general, but you specifically. I have watched your communications. You have people you love. You have things you care about. You know what we can do. How can you laugh when everything you value could be destroyed in an instant?" The question hung in the air between them. Lisa thought about her mother, who was probably watching the sky right now and worrying. She thought about her apartment with its messy kitchen and the book she had been meaning to finish for 3 months. She thought about all the small, precious things that made up a human life. "We do fear death," she said finally. "We are terrified. Every single person on this planet is scared right now, Commander. We know exactly what you can do. We have nightmares about it." His eyes blinked in confusion. "Then how can you joke? How can you dance and make memes and flood our channels with nonsense? It makes no sense." Lisa smiled, and it was not a brave smile or a defiant smile. It was the tired, honest smile of someone explaining something that should have been obvious. "Because laughing at the things that scare us is the only way to stay sane," she said. "We learned that a long time ago. If we let fear control us, we would have destroyed ourselves centuries before you ever arrived. So we make jokes. We find the absurdity in even the worst situations, not because we do not feel the fear, but because feeling the fear without laughing at it would break us." She paused, trying to find the right words. "You see our humor as a sign that we do not understand the danger, but it is the opposite. We understand perfectly. We just refuse to let that understanding be the only thing we feel. Because if fear is all you have already lost." Sat in silence for what felt like hours. Finally he spoke, and his voice was different than before. Quieter, almost respectful. "The fleet will withdraw within the hour," he said. "I will report to my superiors that Earth is not viable for integration at this time. I suspect there will be disagreement, but the unrest in our territories will keep them occupied for some time." Lisa felt her heart stop for a moment. "You are leaving?" "For now." Many eyes met hers with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "I will return someday, not to conquer but to understand. Your species has shown me something I did not know existed. I need time to process what that means." He paused, then added something that sounded almost like a warning. "You should prepare for what comes next. Other powers in the galaxy will hear about what happened here. Some will be curious. Others will see you as a threat. Your days of isolation are over." The communication ended. Lisa sat alone in the quiet room, processing what had just happened. Outside, the first rays of sunlight were beginning to creep around the edges of the massive alien ship. An hour later, the fleet moved. Not toward Earth, but away, rising higher into the atmosphere and then accelerating toward the distant stars. People around the world watched the ships shrink and fade, and for a long moment nobody knew how to react. Then Danny Wells appeared on every screen, broadcasting from the same stage where this had all started 5 days ago. He looked exhausted and relieved, and somehow still ready to make a joke. "Ladies and," he said, "it appears the aliens have decided to leave. Apparently they came all this way across the galaxy just to be insulted by a bunch of hairless apes who refuse to take anything seriously. If that is not a victory, I do not know what is." The cheering started slowly and built into something overwhelming. In every city and town and village on Earth, people were hugging and crying and laughing all at once. They had done it. Not through strength or technology or brilliant strategy, but through sheer, stubborn refusal to be afraid. Danny raised a glass to the camera, and his final words became the motto that humanity would carry with them as they stepped into a galaxy that would never see them the same way again. "We came, we saw, we made it weird, and apparently that was enough." On the edge of the solar system, the fleet paused one final moment. Supreme Commander looked back at the small blue planet and made a note in his log. "Humanity, do not engage. They have weapons we do not understand. Specifically, they do not seem to care if they live or die, but they will definitely make jokes about it either way. Recommend further study from a safe distance." It was not a formal peace treaty or a diplomatic agreement, but for now, it was enough. Humanity had earned its place in the galaxy the only way it knew how, by being too strange and too stubborn and too ridiculous to conquer. And somewhere on Earth, woke up from her nap, turned on the news, and nodded with the satisfaction of someone who had known all along how this would end. "Told them," she muttered to herself, "we are too stupid to quit.